Hey, good to see you again. Thanks for coming back, and thanks for subscribing and following. For those of you who have, I really appreciate it. And we're still within the alternative indie collection, and you will have seen that this is going to be about the Stone Roses. So I'm specifically looking at them within the S's because they're quite an influential band for me. Aside from their influence on Britpop. And obviously being a Manchester band and that scene alongside the Happy Mondays having a huge influence on the type of music that came out of the UK, sort of late 80s but very much early 90s. So I'll start with their self-titled album, and I actually have a special edition one. I think this was a 10-year anniversary one, and I used to have the original CD and then I gave it to someone. I sort of regret that because obviously I got it when it got released. This is more like the cover because I just pulled it out of that sleeve. It's quite a big set. It's actually got 2 CDs in there. The original album, I think it had a remaster, but they didn't do too much to it, so it didn't sort of clean it up or do anything too weird to it. And then a second CD which has a lot of their I don't know if I'd call them B-sides, but also single releases. Stone Roses kind of did a lot of that because they only ever put out 2 full albums, this being their self-titled original album. I'm just trying to talk clearly for you. And this is a fantastic album. It's a 10 out of 10 album. It has been rated in a lot of places as such. What happened for me was back in the 80s, I was a little bit more of a metalhead, or hard rock. I don't think I was really a metaler in the way that some people are, that they have a sophisticated heavy metal collection or something like that. I mean, in those days you had a lot of things on cassettes, and I did have a lot of Metallica, AC/DC, Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Def Leppard. I mean, you start getting into hair metal, Motley Crue, I guess there was Guns N' Roses as well, all that sort of stuff. So hard rock, heavy metal, but not thrash, not really Megadeth or Pantera. Friends of mine were into that, but I didn't really go fully into the metal scene. And then it's during the release of this album, they had ads on TV, believe it or not, promoting the Stone Roses album, and it was the track She Bangs the Drums that just hooked me. I was like, what is this? I had never heard a track quite like that. I kind of picked up on that jangly, baggy pant sound as being psychedelic, and that's what it was. It really did harken back to the 60s. I obviously knew of the Beatles, but it wasn't just sort of a Beatles-esque sound, as Oasis would certainly capitalize on. They were doing something different. Doing a lot of reverb and a lot of playing around with the tapes, reversing things, reversing the drum beats and some of the guitar licks, certainly create a unique sound, and that would have been done back in the day. There's certain bands, and off the top of my head I can't think of them, but psychedelic bands that weren't sort of prominent, but they were sort of just more underground. And it made me think, well, what is this kind of music? I want to find out more, and I went sort of backwards in time to kind of check out these psychedelic bands, 13th Floor Elevator sort of bands, Love and Bread, and along that way, looking again at the Beatles, but not looking at all their hits, trying to discover some of the more I wouldn't say underrated, but maybe the less prominent Beatles tracks. And around, I think it may have been early 90s, the Beatles put out the Beatles Anthology, part of a documentary series. And they re-released a bunch of well-known tracks like Strawberry Fields, but they were recordings that they never used. They sort of just parked and put away in the vault. And they were really interesting recordings, versions of the famous tracks. Because, I would have paid never to hear Strawberry Fields again. I was so sick of it. Sometimes things get overplayed. But suddenly I had a new respect for the Beatles and the sound of these new versions of Strawberry Fields and other tracks like that. And of course, I saw the connection to the Stone Roses when I heard those, and it made me more curious about music history. So it just broke open my musical taste and world, courtesy of this album. And it was really the journey that I embarked on, was to go back and look at the blues, because the Beatles were influenced by the blues. So Big Bill Broonzy, funk, obviously, jazz. I mean, there's certainly jazz qualities to the Stone Roses and funk for sure. But let's get through some of these albums. This one it's a Japanese release only, and it's got a bunch of their singles brought together, some that I hadn't got before on a few of these compilations. So they put out a few things like Fool's Gold, which in my opinion is one of the greatest tracks ever produced. I mean, it is a song, there is singing, but it's really all about that bass line, and it's all about the guitar, and it's just the drum beat. It's just funky. It's just a perfect song. And it's a long song too. I think it's got an epic quality about it, the full-length version that is, because I think it had a radio version. And just when it starts up, it's just like, yeah, it's definitely drawing from funk, funkadelic, but it's doing its own thing. And then with Ian Brown's lyrics and just the way he sung over the top of that. Fool's Gold, I think that came after their initial album, The Stone Roses. So that sort of sits on this one, which is, yeah, like I say, from Japan. I picked it up. It's just got a few extra tracks in there that I hadn't seen before, like Guernica. That was not one that I had on any other compilations. So this is another example, Turns to Stone. Or Turns into Stone, I should say. That's another sort of compilation where there's a bunch of, probably a mix of Stone Roses album, their first album, and then afterwards, because they took a long time to come out with a second album. There was a whole issue with their publishing rights and records contracts that they had, or label contracts, and it's a long story, and I don't know it clearly enough to articulate it, but do look up what happened to the Stone Roses, because by the time they came out with their second album, and this is it, Second Coming, the sort of heat had gone off them, other bands had come up, grunge was in, so, as much as this is, coming out as the Second Coming, like it's a big deal, like the Second Coming of Christ or something, bigger than Jesus. That's a Beatles type thing to pronounce. It's just all called Second Coming, by the way. And nothing wrong with it, but it just, it's hard to have a sophomore album when your first one was just sort of hit it out of the park. And I think a lot of bands can struggle with that. So, aside from the long time it took for this to come out, which was 5 years after their first album, Second Coming was kind of, mixed reviews. It was okay. It's very guitar, more rocky, less psychedelic. And looking back at it now, it's a perfectly good album, fine second album, and it would have been good if they did a third or a fourth. And recently they did release 3 singles, and there was a lot of talk about them coming out with a third album after 20 odd years, or nearly 20 years, but of course it didn't pan out. They did tour, so I got to see them. That was amazing. It was really good because Ian Brown was sounding really good, because his voice can be a little bit mercurial. I've talked about that before. He was amazing. They played amazingly, and I was really lucky to see them. And then of course they disbanded again because John Squire and Ian Brown don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, and that's often the case with bands. Just you can go through the history of bands that fall out and just never really bring it together until they do what they did, which is, I guess, some retirement money. And it was great just to be able to see them, because they never came here when they first released their 2 albums. And then these are sort of coming in afterwards. Again, another compilation. It's me just picking up on a few more. This is quite a long one. There's a lot of tracks on here. A few double ups with tracks I've already got on these other compilations. But I'm trying to be a completist, because I just love the Stone Roses so much that I wanted to make sure I was getting all the bits and pieces. Because, between albums and even after, they were releasing singles. And so a lot of those singles were very strong, with B-sides as well. And finally, I'm going to end on one that came out in 2000, I think. I was looking at, 2000, which is actually just remixes of some of their tracks. So It's a remix album. There's some really good examples of remixes, like a guy called Gerald doing Fool's Gold. That's a good one. Groove Rider also does a version of Fool's Gold on here, and that's pretty cool. I really like Elephant Stone by I don't know, DJ Mint Royal. And yeah, it's middling. There's some, it's not a must-have, but there's some standout tracks on here where they've done justice to some of these Stone Roses songs as remixes. So that's for someone like me who's a fan that would really want to have everything you could possibly get. Obviously, the original album, this was, I think, a 10th year anniversary that came out in 1999, but there has since been, I guess, a 20 year anniversary that came out in 1919, listen to me, 2019. I sort of missed that, and that was a whole lavish set. It's very expensive now, so I'm not going to go and just get it for the sake of having it. But yeah, I would recommend, if you haven't heard of the Stone Roses, check them out, look at their self-titled album, and also check out Fool's Gold. It's just one of those just incredible tracks, really. It's a perfect song, in my opinion. It's just one of the greatest tracks ever. So that's the Stone Roses. I might link to a video. There have been some really good videos put up online, actually. And so it is worth checking out some of the interviews with Ian Brown, some of the old footage of them playing. Also, that documentary Live Forever refers to them. They really did have a great deal of influence, and it was a shame. Well, it's a mix. It's a shame that they couldn't keep going, but at the same time, they gave us one of the greatest albums of all time. That's my personal opinion. And even their second album would be anybody's ideal first album, to be honest. I just think the expectations were so high, they were really never going to create as great an album as their first album. But check out Second Coming as well. It's got some really good tracks on it. And especially the opening track. I mean, they obviously thought we've got to try something new, but we've also got to sound like who we are. When they released the 3 recent tracks, one of them was trying to be an anthem, trying a little too hard. I can't remember what it's called, something like All for One or One for All, whatever. It was okay, but then they released a couple more, and those sounded much more like the Stone Roses that I know and love. So they were pretty good. So you could check out also the more recent ones, but I guess they just didn't have it in them to get in the studio and produce a whole album. But yeah, that's it. And there is another musician that I want to look at, and that's Sufjan Stevens. So I'm going to do a video on Sufjan, and that's probably going to have to be a 2-parter because I've got everything that he's released on CD, and that's quite a lot. So yeah, hope to see you soon, and thanks for coming along. Take care.